It has been a while since I've last talked about Lords of the Fallen on this channel, the last time being over a year ago when I made a comparison to Lies of P. In that video, I did have a scoring system to determine which was better out of the two, and Lies of P did just slightly win that battle. And honestly, looking back at it, I probably should have made the scoring system a little different because I think Lies of P is the much better game from a technical standpoint and just overall how more polished it is. But I did say that Lords of the Fallen had a handful of things that it did better, like the combat system, which people got mad at me because they assumed I meant like the overall combat when I was specifically just talking about the combat system, because overall combat in a Souls game relies heavily on how good the enemy and bosses are, which Lords of the Fallen didn't really do that as well. But the combat system and overall build creation is really good and I think better. You have the best spell system or ranged weapon system that I've ever seen in a Souls game. You get a forgiving dodge, you get deflecting, dual wielding, shields for the sword and board playstyles. And with things like its variety of build types, the rune system, extremely interesting sets of rings and pendants, it makes the build creation probably the best part about the game. I kind of wish the economy wasn't so bad to where I had to break the bank every single time I leveled up a weapon. This part of the game was like so annoying, and it was to the point that my level 1 run was my most enjoyable playthrough because I could just spend my vigor how I wanted. Now the second best part of the game in my opinion is the overall aesthetic. The cool gothic fantasy world with like the over-the-top scenery, enemy designs, and armor sets, which yes, you can actually customize the colors of. It's all very visually pleasing. But as for the main problems I had with the game, the major one being the Umbra world. This gimmick mechanic was somewhat interesting, but in my opinion, it just made the game flat out worse. It was responsible for the performance being really poor. It made it hard to distinguish certain rooms or areas because the Umbra world looked the exact same in almost every single location. The enemy density and distribution was a problem because you had a system to when you die or transfer to the Umbra world, it made it where you not only have so many enemies, but also different types of enemies in the same room. In other games where you had different aesthetics of enemies, they'd be sprinkled throughout the game. But in Lords of the Fallen, you fight almost every enemy the game is designed in just the first few areas. So by the time you get to the end, you fought the same enemy or reskin of enemy thousands of times over. And most people's impressions of a game is going to be the last one, which the final area basically added no new enemies. But worst of all yet, despite the Umbra world being marketed as an option to make the game harder but get more rewards, for most of the game it just wasn't optional. You had to go to the Umbra world just to progress through the game because there was some like basic shitty puzzle in the way. And there's so many cases where these are just mandatory to just progress to the next room. And none of these puzzles were that complex. Every single one of these were just like an artificial way to extend the playing time or just justify the world's existence. Hence it's being a gimmick mechanic. I did have some more issues when it came to the things like the enemies or bosses not being that memorable or fun to fight. Also the replay value in some parts of the level design, specifically the individual levels. I think the whole game interconnects are extremely good. Another issue I had with the game was the lack of various movesets. There's about 150 weapons in the game, but roughly 15 unique movesets amongst all of them. But yeah, I did have some problems with those things. I just don't really want to get too in depth because the main topic of this video is talking about what other things that have changed and is it in a better state? Because in the last year and a half, there has been over 40 updates. So with all these updates, is it now a better game? Well, yeah, obviously it is. After that many updates, you better hope so. But did it fix a lot of the main problems that I had with the game? No, of course not. My problems with the game were more like fundamental, and the things that did improve upon were pretty cool. And look, I've played the game around about 7 times, 5 when the game got released, once last year, and once now as of the 2.0 update. And my major takeaway from my most recent playthrough is that the game is pretty much the same, but smoother and a lot easier. The devs did focus a lot on the performance, which that had to be the top priority. I didn't really talk about it much, but yeah, the game used to run like a dookie. And for me, honestly, I can just look past that stuff. But it does make sense that the most important part about the game is that the game actually works, which I'm glad to report it does work. Now, while I didn't experience any crashes while playing the game on high settings, not maximum settings, just high settings, and while streaming in the borderless windowed mode on my 3080, I basically never had a stable 60 FPS. Even times in the hub world at max, I was getting 40. Some parts of the game still had lots of like weird texture pop-ins, specifically in the cutscenes. But without the streaming in medium settings, full screen, 60 FPS capped, the game ran almost perfectly. And even on the PS5, which yes, I bought the game for both platforms, the PS5 was extremely smooth. I didn't really experience any problems at all. So I do applaud the devs for acknowledging the problems with the game and sticking with it, continuously trying to improve the performance, balancing bug fixes, and backtracking on some of the pretty poor gameplay choices, like the enemy density with all those gangs and removing vestiges from New Game Plus. Now you can very well say that all these should have been part of the game to begin with, which is definitely true, it should have been, but they didn't just fix those things, but they also added a whole bunch of stuff to the game for free. A dozen new spells, additional weapon quest lines to unlock cool skills, built-in randomizer mode, in-game modifiers, a way to refight bosses, and a boss rush mode. And now, as of this 2.0 version of the game, they added seamless co-op, the user interface and HUD improvements, audio improvements, a way to play with your friends that don't even own the game, and a bunch of quality of life updates too. Which that's another thing I didn't talk about much. The quality of life was definitely in need of lots of love. But for me, the most important part about the update was the reworking of the character movements. And I do want to talk about stats. All the other stuff is pretty self-explanatory. But the improved player movement pretty much extends to the lower recovery frames for most weapon attacks. They tone down like the lunge of some of these attacks. There is a dedicated jump button, which I thoroughly despise, because the button is also tied to the interact button, and there's plenty of times where I try to pick something up or climb a ladder and I'm just like jumping instead. And it doesn't seem like there's a way to actually separate the two, so hopefully that gets fixed. But also, the tracking of the weapons is drastically improved, and I mean like ridiculously so. It might be like the best melee weapon tracking I've ever seen in a Souls game. Like, look at this right here. This is a 360-degree running attack. I'm just doing a regular running attack. But by the time I start the animation, I could do more than a full rotation before it even finishes. Like, it definitely feels noticeably different to control. Now, does it fix the weird animations? No, not really. Does it make the boss fights feel better? Sometimes. But speaking of the boss fights, I know they did have an update some time ago that buffed the boss's health and damage, but nerfed enemy ganks, so it felt like the boss fights were more in line with the areas when it came to the difficulty. But honestly, they still felt like they were a pushover. I was just doing a lot of damage to them, but one thing I did notice is that when I finished my playthrough, I was at level 90, and when I looked back at my earlier characters, they finished the game at around about level 73 or 74. So there had to have been an update some time ago that just improved vigor acquisition, which inherently just makes the game a bit easier. Now, if you are still concerned about the game being easy, as I did mention a bit earlier, there are some in-game modifiers that kind of serve somewhat as like difficulty modifiers. You have things like increasing enemy density, permadeath, decreased healing, and less checkpoints. Which, yes, these things are definitely going to make the game harder, but this is still just artificial difficulty, and you can just variable influence these things yourself in your own runs. You don't need the game to do it for you, but it's still cool that they actually did do this. When it comes to the online experience though, I didn't really get to play much with like the co-op nor the seamless co-op at all. I did hear some things that the seamless co-op isn't really working that well, or there's still like lots of network issues. I did like a couple of PvP games, and the network does seem a lot better than what it once was. It feels like the first couple of days when the game was released and I was doing invasions, there was so much rubber banding, disconnects, the input lag was insane, and none of that was really present, but the netcoding still isn't really anything amazing. So in summary, basically everything I liked or disliked about the game pretty much stayed the same, except for when it came to things like performance and replay value. Those are definitely better now. The performance, although not the best, it is very manageable. And the replay value is better, mainly because of the randomizer modifier and adding these new spells. Although one thing I would have liked to see is us having more accessible respecking. That would have been pretty nice. But do I recommend buying the game if you haven't already played it before? And honestly, yeah, if you are in need to scratch that Souls itch, I would get it. It's definitely one of the better ones that still fall under the traditional Souls-like RPG, because nowadays all the Souls-like games that we get are more like action hack and slash types of games with like these stupid skill tree customizations, which I don't care for at all, but that is a combo for another day. But now is a better time than ever to purchase the game because it is currently 70% off, and it still is cool to support devs that really care about their games, despite this probably being like a big PR move to just get some like more game developer cred, because yeah, between the first Lords of the Fallen game and the release of the second one, you lost a lot of interest from a lot of people. So if you actually want more people to play the sequel that was announced, something has got to give, and consistent updates that give stuff for free is definitely one of those things to give. So yeah, it's pretty cool. But anyway, that's everything that I wanted to cover in this one. See you guys.